Hi everyone, JP here from the Art of Brilliance, and I'm delighted to be with you this lunchtime and really grateful that we're going to spend 30 minutes together. Also, when we're talking about a subject that's quite close to my heart. So let me kick off by asking you a couple of questions which might point you in this direction. So, are you comfortable in accepting praise from other people? Do you doubt your own general intelligence? And do you think people are going to be disappointed when they realise what you really know? If you've answered yes to any of those questions or all three, the chances are you've logged on because actually you recognise this thing called imposter syndrome. And for me, that's kind of been in my life. I mean, certainly when I was asked to do this, it kind of kicked in for me about who's going to listen to me talk about this thing. But it's not just me and you. You probably think it's just you and me on this call, but there's thousands of people do it. Probably people you might never think. There's some famous people that recognise that they suffer or recognise imposter syndrome in their own life. People like Maya Angelou certainly did it. Charles Schultz, the creator of Peanuts, and Melinda Gates, even Michelle Obama recognises imposter syndrome from time to time. And the one that really surprised me when I found out was Tom Hanks. Now, he's one of these famous film stars that you kind of think would never have any doubt. But he says that actually every time that he's offered a film part, he kind of thinks, who am I? Why would they offer it to me? Constantly being kind of this imposter syndrome, that feeling of one day not being good enough and you might get found out. But where does it come from? I mean, I got really interested in it because when I did the Art of Being Brilliant sessions, I always ask about kind of things that hold us back. Those things, that kind of stop you from doing stuff. Now, I have a very simple philosophy in life, which is simply you are all incredible people capable of incredible things. But there's one thing that consistently gets in our way. And when I ask you that, you're probably all going to say, yes, JP, us. Yeah, and we do. So I think for me, one of those things when I always kind of talk to people is that they say kind of those barriers we put around ourselves. Imposter syndrome kept coming up and saying, yeah, that recognising it. So I wanted to know a little bit more about it. Where did it come from? I certainly recognised it, that kind of that feeling of not being good enough. But where does it come from? Now, if I get you to picture maybe a smiling toddler or imagine yourself as a smiling toddler, at that point in your life, did you have it? Did you recognise that actually you're an imposter? I think the chances are you'd probably say no. And for me, that means just quite clearly that it's not always been there. We weren't born with it. We've learnt it. It's a learned thing, but actually maybe from stories that we keep telling ourselves. So today what I want to bring you is kind of maybe explode a few myths about it, what it is, what it isn't, but also kind of maybe and share 3 tips with you about how maybe things you can put in your life from even this afternoon, because you might be sat in meetings and you'll certainly be sat in meetings with other people who are going on, they're not going to say anything because actually that you might find out I might not know what you think I do. So lots of people stay quiet. But in the grand scheme of things we do, I always love to bring things with a theme, really. I love the old Sesame Street stuff when they're kind of brought to you by a number. Or today I'm going to bring to you this by the joy of the AAA battery. And what I mean by the AAA battery is the 3 A's. Awareness. For me, when we're aware of something, we can do something about it. If we're not aware of it, we continue to do what we've always done. Our brain is so automatic, though, working on autopilot, we'll just continue to do stuff as we've always done it. So let's just raise your awareness with this webinar about things, maybe recognising the things in you, but also what you could do about it and acknowledging it. Actually, do you know what? It is a thing. It's something that I recognise. Doesn't define me as a person, but then I can do something about it. So moving into action, and the things, maybe some tips I share with you, maybe certainly work for me, but try them on for size. You're going to have to practice this stuff. It's not a one size and kind of one size fits all and you've done it and it just disappears. You're going to have to continue to do it. So kind of for me this afternoon, as soon as we finish and you go back to whatever it is you're doing, just raise your awareness about actually what is this? What is this script I keep telling myself? And keep doing it. You've got to keep doing this. It's about practice. You're going to have ample opportunity to put this into place, but let's keep practicing. So let's kind of look at what it isn't. So what it isn't, it's not a syndrome. A syndrome has to be clinically diagnosable. You won't be able to go off to the doctors and kind of talk about it and he's going to diagnose you with imposter syndrome. So that kind of explodes the myth. It's actually it's more of a phenomena. It's a reoccurring emotional experience. That emotion in us, the feelings we get around actually this imposter or maybe going to get found out, drives our behavior, safety behavior. So we just kind of stick into our comfort zone. We don't do anything. We don't say anything. We just stay quiet because then I can't get found out. If you look at all the research about it, it's costing British business millions because there's plenty of people in meetings doing that, staying quiet, keeping themselves safe. They've got great ideas. They know the answers to all these things, but they stay quiet because they're worried they're going to get found out. In fact, it's really well documented that people leave organisations before they get found out, or in their head, it's before they get found out. Now, it's what it really is for me is that gap about who you see yourself as being and who you think you need to be. You're not recognising what you bring. You're not recognising that kind of brilliant version of you. You're thinking about what you think you need to be to kind of get on and succeed. And it's people have those kind of feelings of self-doubt. I think there's a difference between self-doubt and imposter syndrome. Self-doubt is what you think you can do, and imposter syndrome is who you think you really are. Now, if we look at it, I like to see people as icebergs, really. If you think about it above the line, the stuff you can see. Now, I can see the stuff that people do, the results that they get, the performance they put in. I can see those behaviours, the stuff they do. That's what we all see about each and every person, but it's not really telling us the full story. We need to get underneath the water. We need to get underneath people to see how they think, to see how they feel, what maybe beliefs they have about themselves. Because certainly if you have the belief of not being good enough, well, one day you're going to get found out. We need to start changing that script. Looking at values, but looking at that identity level, sat there at identity level is where you think it is. But there's also if you look around, what kind of imposter are you? There's some telltale signs. So when I go through these things, you might be going, yeah, JP, that's me. And you might answer it to all of it, but recognizing the elements within this might give you a clue. So if you would class yourself as a perfectionist, where might it come from? I mean, are you convinced that any error is a sign of weakness, or that 99% of success isn't good enough? And if you make a mistake, do you have trouble letting it go? But do you never recognise, do you over prepare for meetings? And if you're making presentations, are you got everything there, or you need to know everything? I certainly worked with somebody once who needed to know the answers to any possible questions they might ever be asked. So hugely over prepared, massive perfectionist. So is that you? Now, what about the superhero? They talk about the superhero you feel like you need to be one. Because if you ask for help, that really is an admission of weakness. But what it also shows is actually, if I'm not sure of my ability, there's one thing that I'm going to be able to do, and that's going to be I'm going to outwork you. You won't work as hard as me. And if I'm not as talented as you, there's one thing I'll do, then I will outwork you. But what about that workaholic? Do you feel that do you feel the pressure to work longer and harder than everybody else? Because that's the way you keep up. And even though you're really busy and you've got so much on your plate, you seek out other opportunities to get involved in stuff, because then, of course, obviously really busy, nobody's going to ever find you out. And that natural genius they talk about, the learning new things should be easy. And you give up on things that don't come easy. And you might feel a little bit ashamed about when things shouldn't be that long to learn. Is that you? Or what about this thing they call the expert? Believing that knowledge is power. And do you need to know everything about a job before you feel you can do it? And this is one that really resonates with me, is looking for new training opportunities and almost like new badges to prove to yourself that you know what you're talking about, even though you'll get lots of feedback from people telling you that you've got all the credentials that you need to be able to do it. But do you shudder when people call you an expert? All of these elements is pointing that, yeah, we've got this thing, or we recognise something that this imposter. Who am I to be called all these things? Who am I to be given this job? Why did they give it to me? And what I want you to think about is your mind now as a computer, kind of your database, your operating system. I always think about kind of, if you imagine yourself now, ever since you were born, you've had a little version of you sat on your shoulder with a computer, with a kind of keyboard, tip-tapping everything you've ever experienced, everything you've come across, everything you've thought, everything you've seen, and it's storing this thing in this database, this thing that's incredible within our heads, which has for me one major impediment, which is we as human beings are naturally negative. We are naturally kind of brought into it, kind of seeing the negative. It's a safety mechanism again. So all those negative experiences that you've been tip-tapping in your little keyboard, you've been storing away. So when you get this feeling of imposter syndrome, your brain's helping you out, going, look at all this evidence that kind of proves that you're right, when it's just a story you've made up about yourself. So how do we change that story? The first thing I would get you to do, and my biggest tip really, tip number one, is to get yourself a journal. Now, I used to work for W.H. Smith. I love a bit of stationery, and I peddle them all the time, but I don't know. It's kind of, for me, journaling, if you do it, if you know people that journal, I think it's great. Because what you're doing is actually being able to process things a lot more rationally than the emotional stuff, that kind of that reoccurring emotional experience I talked about is definitely easily more processable if you write stuff down. Now also kind of, I work in sport and I always give people journals because I want you to record the good stuff. Because actually what we're recording is the good stuff, so we keep in it. The brain naturally will let it go because it's no use to us. But actually for me, we want to hold on to that stuff, to give ourselves a body of evidence to show us that we're not an imposter. You'll have feedback that shows you do actually know what you're doing. But actually, unless we're recording this stuff somewhere or processing things in a much more rational way, we tend to hold on to that negative stuff. They always say that your kind of negative thoughts, the stuff you experience, is a bit like Velcro. It sticks, you hold on to it. And all those positive experiences are like Teflon because it's not no use to you, because the brain's function, its really only function, is to keep you safe. So it's looking for those things, looking stuff for you to keep in your comfort zone, and we get it. We stick there. But we all have these triggers. I mean, if I ask you kind of now and get you to think about when you have this feeling of imposter syndrome, what kind of triggers it? Because we will all have triggers that triggers an emotion in us. Things will happen, people will say stuff, it'll generate an emotion, that emotion will generate what we do, and then the outcomes we get. But where does it come from? What are the trigger points? Is it a general feeling that you have it all the time, or is there specific instances that create that feeling of, do you know what, I'm going to get found out here, I'm not as good as they think I am? Because then if we know them specifically, we can start tackling them. Because what this feeling is, that kind of emotional experience, that recurring one they talked about, it's not really a feeling at all. It's a feeling, yeah, but it's not a fact. What you feel about yourself is not necessarily absolutely true, and I want you to deal in fact. Because if we can deal in fact, record them in our journals, if you like, then we can do something about them. Because those feelings create kind of a real belief. You believe, a lot of us today will be, yeah, absolutely, we're an imposter. And I can tell you every single minute of this webinar that you're not. And that you'll be like, yeah, it's easy for you to say, JP, you're not sat where I am. But actually, for me, you're not an imposter. You've just got the belief you're an imposter. So the second tip I've got for you really is as simple as learning your ABCDEs. Bit of a mouthful, I know, but it's a really good model for you to use to start breaking this down. So those triggering events I talked about, that's your A, okay? That's the A of the ABCDE model. Let's put that down, the adverse situations. Put that against your column A. Then in column B, what generates that belief? Those things generate a belief in me that actually, do you know what, I'm an imposter or I'm not good enough. That has an emotional effect on me, an emotional consequence. And what is that? That goes in C. But once we've got that, particularly the B, what's that belief? We can start using column D to our advantage, which is disputing it. People say to me all the time, "Oh, JP, I always do that. That's just me." And I go, "What, always?" "Oh, yeah, not always." So, okay, we've just disputed it. We've just shown it's not true. We generalize about stuff. So let's get into that. The belief you've got, let's look for the evidence. Let's look for the facts that prove to you that's just not true. Record that in column D before you then can create this more effective new philosophy for yourself to recognize that that's not true. So what would be a more effective philosophy for me around realizing that I am good enough? I'm just me. I mean, the world needs us to be ourselves, best version of ourselves, a bit more often, but we can definitely do that with this new effective philosophy. So the simple ABCDE model will help you start breaking that down, recognizing the situations so you can create and dispute this so that actually you recognize that some of the things you've generalized about yourself and kind of belief about yourself is just not true. But for me, kind of one of the key things is this computer. Talking about that computer, this thing is still in there. It has loads, we are accessing it on every situation. So what's in it? Are we storing anything that's useful for us in the situations that we've just described? Those adverse situations or the trigger points for ourselves, how do we want to behave? So there's something, I mean, working in sport, we use mental rehearsal quite a lot. It's a really favourite subject of mine because I just don't think it should be the exclusive use of kind of elite athletes or any athletes. We can all use it to our kind of advantage. Now, I call it mental rehearsal because some of you will be familiar with the kind of process or what people call visualization. But for me, unless you're a visual person, so you see things in pictures, visualization is not really good enough. It's not really encompassing enough because actually you don't operate like that. So for me, mental rehearsal is much more encompassing. And for me, it needs to be multisensory, not just visual, because actually that is something that actually we can all do. Now, what I love about mental rehearsal is you are rehearsing the stuff that you want to be in these situations, the adverse situations that you've described. How do you want to behave? Because what I know about the brain now is not only doesn't know the difference between right and wrong, true or false, it believes everything you tell it, tapping on that keyboard, but also it doesn't know the difference between a real event and an imagined event. The same neuro pathways in the brain gets fired off. So actually we can use this to our advantage because actually how do we want to practice? You may this afternoon be going into a meeting or making a big phone call that you're a bit nervous about. So I'd get you to mentally rehearse it. What does it look like? I mean, with the great Stephen Covey, he said, start with the end in mind. So what is it you want the result to be? Or what do you want the kind of, after you've finished it, how do you want to feel? And what would you like people saying about you? Now you can mentally rehearse this and kind of just see yourself doing all the things you want. Because once you've got the outcome, you can say, I mean, they talk about in sport, don't they? Everybody talks about, you hear them all right, focus on the process. But once you're clear about how you want to be in these situations, then you can work out the process about what you want to do in each bit. Now, the thing for me, rehearsing it, literally in real time, it's far more effective in your belief. It aids your belief if you do it in real time. And when you're relaxed, you're giving that computer some great advice or some great material to work with that when you're in this situation, you can deal with it. So whatever it is, think about how you want to be when you talk with these people, make presentations, and practice it. The brain doesn't know the difference between you doing it and imagining it. Loads of research in the States about basketball teams and the impact of just visualizing or just kind of mentally rehearsing it against doing it. Similar improvement between actually doing stuff and mentally rehearsing it. So therefore, if you could do them together, what a great impact it had on your performance. But don't let this be a kind of exclusive club for those elite athletes. I want you to start looking at it for yourself in whatever these adverse situations are, because actually kind of if you can use this either before or after to kind of review stuff, you again creating a really good operating model for your computer to be able to access under times when you think you're going to get hijacked. Because that's really what it is. That emotional response is a bit of a hijack that's stopping you from being who you really are. My third bit, really the last one, is again, I use it in sport with people, and I think it's a tool you can all use. It's something called the if-then scenario. Feels a bit weird because I want you to pre-plan adversity. Okay, again, filling your computer with great advice, with great strategies, with great techniques that you can use. You can go through anything you're going to face and kind of what could go wrong. Everything that could go wrong, let's get it out there. It feels weird when you're talking to people about, right, okay, you're in a presentation, you're in a meeting, or you're making a phone call. Right, let's talk about everything that can go wrong. Because then if we can identify it, then we can come up with a plan. How are we going to deal with this? And if we've got a plan, then actually, if it does ever happen, we are calmed down because we've got the answers. We've already done it. Now, it's interesting that actually, I don't know, I've been involved in many projects kind of in my corporate days that we did post-mortems after them because actually we wanted to know what went wrong. I think if I had my time again and what I don't know now, I think I'd do a pre-mortem. What might go wrong? Because actually then if we work out what might go wrong, then we can create a plan for it. I mean, you'll have all kind of been in with people who kind of told you that, do you know what? I knew that was going to happen. Well, why didn't you tell me? But actually, if we get that out of the way, we can create a plan for it. But the overall thing for me that I want to leave you with, really, is I want you to practice. You know, when we finish it and you lock off your computer or shut this browser down, that actually something's going to happen. Some situation that you feel, did you know what, a meeting, a phone call, a presentation, whatever it is where you feel these feelings of being an imposter, there'll be an opportunity to practice, and that's great. Yeah, we're going to get some stuff wrong. We're going to kind of make mistakes, but we know then there'll be another opportunity to practice. But practice is what it's all about. And if I could ask you that question, what does practice make? And you can't say perfect because we talked about perfectionism being one of those barriers that gets in the way. I think we just need to keep doing it. Yeah, review it, keep doing it, practice being ourselves. And over time, that feeling and recognizing that you are good enough, you're more than enough, we can start using it to our own advantage, to achieving whatever you want to achieve that you feel the imposter syndrome is holding you back. So listen, thank you for listening today. Thank you for spending time with me. Really appreciate it. If you want some more details, look on our website. There's loads more stuff, hints, tips, techniques that we can go through that kind of you can use to your advantage so that you start being that person who you really are. See you soon.